Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 2, Creating the United States. So in this video, I'm going to give you an overview of 4 key founding documents that we will dive into deeper as we go through this unit. So this video is meant to give you some background knowledge so that we can dive deeper in class. So the first document that I'm going to discuss is the Declaration of Independence, 1776. I hope that we've all heard of it, right? The Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson with a lot of input from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin as well. They actually wrote it kind of in a committee together, and then Thomas Jefferson was in charge of synthesizing all of their ideas to create the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is composed of 2 key sections: the preamble, which goes into a statement of natural rights and the ways in which Great Britain has violated the colonists' natural rights, and gives kind of their explanation for why they need to cut ties with Great Britain. And then a section of grievances, where the colonists really lay out all of the things that the king has done that they find violate their natural rights or break the social contract. So do you remember what a grievance is? You should, but if you don't, a grievance is a complaint or a problem. So we should think of the Declaration of Independence as an exercise of social contract, right? The king is not protecting the colonists' natural rights, and so therefore the colonists are going to abolish that government and start a new government. The Declaration of Independence has a couple influences. First, the Declaration of Independence obviously is influenced by Enlightenment ideas. So Thomas Jefferson is very much influenced by Rousseau and Locke and their ideas of natural rights and social contract. We also, I told you in video 1 that our founding fathers and founding documents are very much influenced also by Voltaire, who gives us a lot of the ideas that we see in our First Amendment, and Montesquieu, who gives us the ideas of separation of power and 3 branches of government that we see in our Constitution. The Declaration of Independence is also very much influenced by Thomas Paine's common sense. So Thomas Jefferson writes the Declaration of Independence in July of 1776. Thomas Paine publishes this pamphlet in January of 1776, so about 7 months before. And this pamphlet is advocating complete independence from Great Britain to the people of the 13 colonies, right? And it becomes an immediate sensation. Paine advocates for complete and total independence from Great Britain, and he says that it is just common sense that the colonies become their own sovereign country and are no longer colonies of Great Britain. So as a result of the Declaration of Independence, right, we know that that's why we celebrate the 4th of July, because we see here July 4th, 1776. Okay, so our official Declaration of Independence from Great Britain. So then, of course, we have the American Revolution, which we'll talk more about in class. I'm just focusing on founding documents in this lesson. Okay, so the second founding document that we want to discuss is maybe one that you haven't really heard of, is the Northwest Ordinance. So here you see a map of the Northwest Territory. So the American Revolution ends with the Treaty of Paris, and Great Britain gives up all lands extending to the Mississippi River. Okay, so obviously that includes Ohio. These new states, this new territory with the Northwest Ordinance would become eventually new and separate states. Okay, so Congress meets and passes the Northwest Ordinance, and they decide to sell this land at auction. So Congress was not able to tax citizens under America's first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, which I'll talk about in a minute. And so they thought that by selling this land at public auction, the government could make some money back because our government was in dire economic straits after the Revolutionary War. The Northwest Ordinance is important because it addressed the need for government in the Northwest Territory and establishes precedents for the future governing of the United States. So you could think of a precedent as a law that influences further documents. Okay, so if you look at this thought bubble right here, you see that many of the ideas in the Northwest Ordinance later show up in the Bill of Rights and the United States Constitution. So you should know these, and you could jot these down, that the Northwest Ordinance gave freedom of religion to worship, right? A jury trial, no cruel and unusual punishment. We see all of these ideas in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. Something we don't see in our Constitution, but that was established in the Northwest Territory because of the Northwest Ordinance, is that there would be no slavery in this territory. A couple other important details from the Northwest Ordinance is that the Northwest Ordinance establishes public schools and public education. And it also establishes a Republican form of government in the Northwest Territories. So in a Republican democracy, we, the citizens, vote for people who, like our members of Congress, who then go represent us in our government. So the Northwest Ordinance establishes a Republican form of government in the Northwest Territory. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about drafting the Constitution. Our third document, the Constitution. So the Constitution, at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, we have 55 delegates show up from every colony except Rhode Island. And they go there under the guise of revising the weak and ineffective Articles of Confederation. Okay, so this was the first Constitution of the United States, and it was weak and ineffective because it basically gave all of the power to the states, and the federal government had no key powers, like the federal government could not tax, for example. So after it becomes clear that the Articles of Confederation just can't be salvaged, the delegates at the Constitutional Convention completely scrap the Articles of Confederation and draft a new constitution. And they deliberate in secret with the windows and doors shut to prevent leaks. And this, you can imagine, proceeded through the summer months in a building without ventilation or indoor plumbing or obviously air conditioning. So it was a very tough working environment. And you should also recognize that there was just a general lack of trust between the states, right? The states at this time almost saw themselves as little separate countries. So there was a lack of trust between slave states and free states, between big states and small states. And this means that the delegates at the Constitutional Convention are going to have to compromise. And so we see that they compromise on two big ideas: representation and the role of the national government. How much role should the federal government play versus the state government? We're going to start here by talking about representation. So this idea of representation, how we are represented in Congress, and what they come up with is actually called the Great Compromise. So here was the original plan. There were two plans put forth at the Constitutional Convention. The first was the Virginia Plan. So you should write this down. The Virginia Plan proposed that the number of state senators and representatives should be based on population. This, of course, is beneficial and favorable to large states. And Virginia was a large state, so that's what they wanted. On the flip side of that, the New Jersey Plan, New Jersey is a small state, said, no, Virginia, that's not fair to us. So each state should have the same number of senators and representatives. And so what they come up with is the Great Compromise, which establishes a bicameral legislature, which is what we have today, right? Today, our Congress is divided into two houses: the Senate, where there's equal representation, and the House, which is based on population. So that is the Great Compromise, a bicameral legislature with a Senate and a House, a combination of the Virginia and the New Jersey plans. The other compromise, major compromise that we see, is this idea around slavery and whether slaves should count as population towards a state's representation in Washington. So obviously, Southern states wanted slaves to count towards their population because that would give them more representation in the House and that would give them more political power. And so their argument was, listen, North, slaves should absolutely count because you're counting women in your population and women can't vote, but they're still counted, right? And the North was like, listen, South, slaves should not be counted because you consider slaves to be property, right? Instead of counting slaves in your population for representation purposes, what we should really be doing is taxing your slaves because it's property and we should be able to tax that property. And so the solution that they come up with is the 3/5 compromise. You should write this down, which said that slaves should count as 3/5 of a person. And the way that you can think about that is that for every 5 slaves, 3 of them would be added to the overall population of that state. And then their number of congressmen or representatives in the House would be determined from there. The final document that I want to discuss is the Bill of Rights, okay, which 1791, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, and this was really advocated by anti-federalists who felt that there needed to be something in the Constitution that protected the rights of the people and the rights of states. The Bill of Rights has many, many influences and gains its influences from 3 major sources. So the first source is the Magna Carta and English Bill of Rights. This is English law. So it's pulling from English common law to gain inspiration. The second source, and an example of that would be the Massachusetts Government Act and the Virginia Declaration of Rights, are early American government documents, right? So that's the second source of information, along with the Northwest Ordinance. And then the final influence is the Enlightenment and Enlightenment ideas, okay? So I just want to focus on briefly here the 2 documents that come from English law, and you can just take a minute and look over this, some of the provisions of the English Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta. And I just want to point out that a lot of these ideas, again, influence our Bill of Rights, which is written by James Madison, and he pulls a lot of these ideas into the Bill of Rights. So if you look closely at these 2 provisions of the Magna Carta, you see that this really gives us this idea of due process, which we see in our Bill of Rights, okay? That everyone should have a jury trial and this equal treatment under the law, okay? All right, well, thanks for watching, and I will see you all soon. Bye.